Welcome to the Ukraine Chronicles. As the Ukraine Chronicles family, we continue to bring you the hottest news from Ukraine's liberation struggle. You can increase your support to the heroic Ukrainian soldiers in this brave struggle by liking our video and subscribing to our channel. The war in Ukraine has brought the Russian soldiers to such a level that even the Ukrainians were stunned by this situation. For a long time, the Russian soldiers who were on the Ukrainian front lines, suffering from hunger and thirst, dealing with problems such as accommodation, now choose the right path and took a step that will mark history. You know that the Russian soldiers on the Ukrainian front lines were either fleeing from the battlefield or surrendering to the Ukrainian army for the reasons we have mentioned to you. A stunning piece of data that emerged this week revealed that instead of fleeing the trench lines, Russian soldiers surrendered to the Ukrainian army. A military structure known as the Free Russian Legion within the Ukrainian army has doubled the number of its members, in line with the data released today. The increase in this number is evaluated as the harsh war policies of the Russian leader Vladimir Putin and the insufficient opportunities provided to the soldiers of the Russian armed forces. In other words, against all this confusion and system division caused by Russian leader Vladimir Putin, the Russians gathered together to fight not their homeland, but the Putin regime and tyranny. Since they were true patriots, with the onset of the war, a legion of Russian fighters was formed, with symbols of a closed fist with the words freedom and Russia. The legion is part of the international volunteer group within the Ukrainian army. The group is also trying to prove Ukraine's democracy and freedom by supporting it. Russia's Freedom Legion, which mainly publishes propaganda videos on social media sites such as Telegram, Twitter and Instagram, receives thousands of requests from Russians who say they want to join them. Legion spokesperson Caesar says they are politically motivated and describe themselves as right-wing nationalists who believe that the Vladimir Putin regime can only be overthrown by force. The Free Russian Legion, made up of Russian soldiers who fled shortly after Putin ordered the invasion on February the 24th, a year ago, addressed Russian President Vladimir Putin's soldiers. Against Vladimir Putin's forces, the audacious Russians fighting for Ukraine vowed to fight tooth and nail to repel his armies and warned their compatriots. Members of the Free Russian Legion stated that the real enemies of the Russian people reside in the Kremlin. The members openly admit that they took part in this union, stating that they were against the invasion and did not like Russian President Vladimir Putin. But they are also concerned that they or their relatives will be specifically targeted. So who are these Russians fighting against their own country in the ranks of Ukraine? Some became involved in the war because they felt that they were already living in Ukraine, and even if they were Russian citizens, they had to defend their settlement. The Legion's manifestos described them as free citizens of Russia, who have taken up their own responsibilities and started to fight for the new Russia. And for the past year, they have been locked in a bloody war with their own compatriots. Ukrainian military intelligence spokesman Andriy Yuzov states that too many Russian agents have been caught trying to infiltrate this unit. At the same time, Russian soldiers who joined the unit emphasized that they can join after passing the polygraph test, also known as the polygraph test, and after their criminal records are subjected to strict screening. There are fighters from many countries such as the USA, the United Kingdom, Belarus and Georgia alongside these soldiers, who are affiliated with the International Legion for the Regional Defense of Ukraine. The exact number of Free Russian Legion troops is a closely guarded secret, but estimates put them at around 8,000. Most are based in Bakhmut, now held by Ukrainian forces, which saw some of the fiercest clashes of the entire war. So, how did Russia, which has one of the most developed and powerful armies in the world, come to the brink of such a division with the Ukraine war? Let's first take a look at where this problem started. Even if most Russians did not notice the crisis in the war in the first months after the invasion of Ukraine, the mobilization that took place in September was enough to change mass consciousness. There is no reason to doubt the failure of the mobilization. In a word, we can say that it is a fiasco story. After all, the most important strategic retreat of the Russian army, namely the surrender of Kherson, took place after thousands of soldiers were sent to the front. The flight of men and young families from Russia, which began after the declaration of mobilization, resulted in at least 1 million people leaving the country. In short, we can say that Vladimir Putin's mobilization campaign has completely collapsed. On the other hand, the most discussed manifestation of the political division within the system was the open clashes between the regular army and the Wagner private military company founded by Yevgeny Prigozhin. Prigozhin, who had the right to virtually disregard the laws and procedures imposed by the Russian administration, formed his own private army, equipped with artillery, tanks, and planes, and reinforced by the forced conscription of prisoners in the camps. Disregarding Russian law, Prigozhin supporters exercised their own military justice by publicly executing deserters and threatening to execute their soldiers on the spot for attempting to withdraw. Already in the summer, an open power struggle began between Prigozhin and the active Russian generals. Aggressive insults flew around, and armed clashes took place between the Wagnerists and the army, who did not want to recognize the norms of behavior established by the Russian armed forces. As a matter of fact, the troubles experienced with it were just the tip of the iceberg. Putin, who could not solve the problems in Ukraine, is now losing many more soldiers. Because when we look at the Donbass front line, especially in Bakhmut, one of the hottest spots of the war, Russian citizens fighting on the side of Ukraine target the Russian forces with rocket launchers, tanks, and rifles. Despite reports of gains around Bakhmut following the Russian fall of the nearby town of Soledar, Moscow forces were unable to establish definitive control over the bombed-out city. Moscow's aim was to encircle Bakhmut with tactical advances from the north and the south of the city. However, the Russian military forces suffered significant losses, with reserves and Wagner mercenaries among the tens of thousands determined to seize Bakhmut. All these losses, and the point reached, have made disputes about failures on the battlefield in Ukraine more and more frequent. As such, it became clear that the notorious paramilitary unit the Wagner Group had lost its influence in the war months later. As Prigozhin's appetite for politics increased, cracks began to appear in his relations with the Kremlin. It also pointed to the Russian army's incompetence when it praised its fighters as the most effective units in the war, despite not making any significant progress in the warring city of Bakhmut, where over the past 6 months, it has flown mostly Russian prisoners. But the Wagner Group now appears to play a less important role in operations around Bakhmut. The Wagner Group is now losing its power because the Kremlin wants to show that they are responsible. This tension escalated when Putin attributed the success at Soledar to his Ministry of Defense, without mentioning the Wagner Group. Prigozhin accused the ministry of trying to underestimate the role of the Wagner Group in the capture of Soledar and belittle its achievements. While the differences of opinion, tension, and violence continue in the Russian army, as a result, there are Russian citizens and other countries joining the Ukrainian army, and the brave army of Kiev is getting stronger day by day. Thank you for watching us.